The crystal wineglass slipped from Vanessa Ashcroft's fingers and exploded against the polished marble floor. The sharp crack echoed across the grand ballroom, silencing hundreds of conversations in an instant. Every head turned toward the entrance. A billionaire had just walked in, but no one was staring at him. They were staring at the young woman beside him. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Who is she? That's not his assistant. I heard she's his housekeeper. Impossible. Vanessa's carefully practiced smile disappeared. Her eyes widened as she looked from the elegant young woman standing confidently beside Damien Sterling to Damien himself. You actually brought her, Vanessa whispered, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. Damien met her gaze without the slightest hint of emotion. I did. The room seemed to stop breathing. No one knew that this single decision was about to expose the emptiness hidden behind million-dollar smiles and family fortunes. But to understand why the most influential businessman in Ashbourne City had chosen his quiet housekeeper over every glamorous woman in his social circle, they would have to go back 3 days. Grace Bennett had learned long ago that invisible people heard everything. Every morning before sunrise, she quietly dusted shelves, arranged fresh flowers, polished expensive furniture, and prepared breakfast inside Sterling Manor. She never interrupted conversations, never asked unnecessary questions, never drew attention to herself. For almost a year, she had worked in the mansion without giving anyone a reason to complain. The staff liked her because she never gossiped. The security guards respected her because she greeted everyone by name. Even the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, often smiled whenever Grace entered the kitchen. You remind me of my daughter, Mrs. Brooks said one morning while pouring tea. Grace smiled softly. I hope that's a good thing. It is. She had the same kind eyes. Grace lowered her head. My mother always said kindness doesn't cost anything. Brooks nodded. Your mother raised you well. Grace smiled, though mentioning her mother always stirred a quiet ache in her heart. Life had not been gentle with her. Her father had passed away when she was 16. Her mother had spent years battling illness before she too was gone. Since then, Grace had worked wherever she could, restaurants, hotels, cleaning offices, until fate somehow led her to Sterling Manor. Working for Damien Sterling wasn't easy. He demanded excellence. Everything had to be perfect. Yet he never shouted, never insulted anyone. His silence carried far more authority than anger ever could. Grace rarely spoke to him beyond simple greetings. Good morning, sir. Evening, sir. He usually responded with a polite nod before disappearing into meetings or business calls. That was enough for her. She had no interest in the glamorous world surrounding his name. She simply wanted honest work. One rainy afternoon, Grace carried fresh towels upstairs when voices drifted from Damien's study. She wasn't trying to listen. She merely froze when she heard one sentence. This wedding isn't about love. Another man sighed. It's a performance. Grace quietly stepped away, but before she reached the stairs, another sentence stopped her. Vanessa invited you because she wants everyone watching. She wants the cameras. Wants people wondering if you've moved on. Damien's voice remained calm. I already have. His friend laughed bitterly. Then prove it. Grace hurried downstairs before anyone noticed her. She hated overhearing private conversations. Still, those words lingered. The wedding clearly meant far more than people believed. That evening, Damien returned home later than usual. The mansion felt unusually tense. Even the staff whispered among themselves. Invitation arrived. They say every major news outlet will be there. I heard the Ashcroft family invited politicians, celebrities, everyone. Grace ignored the gossip. She finished preparing the dining room and quietly started walking toward the kitchen. Grace. She stopped immediately. Damien rarely called her by name. She turned. Yes, sir. He stood near the fireplace, one hand resting in his pocket. Need a moment. Her heart skipped. Had she forgotten something? Was there a complaint? She followed him into the library. The room felt unusually quiet. He motioned toward a chair. She remained standing. I'll stand, sir. As you wish. Several seconds he simply looked at her, not awkwardly, thoughtfully. Finally he spoke. I received an invitation to a wedding. Yes, sir. I intend to attend. She nodded politely. I hope it goes well. Won't. That answer surprised her. Before she could respond, he continued. I need someone to accompany me. Grace blinked. Sure, your assistant can arrange everything. Don't want my assistant. She frowned slightly. I'm afraid I don't understand. I want you. The words hung in the air. For a moment she wondered if she had misunderstood. Me, sir? Yes, she laughed nervously. I can prepare your suit or help with luggage. He shook his head. No, another silence. Then he spoke the sentence that completely changed her world. Want you to attend as my guest. Grace stared at him. Your housekeeper. I know, people will talk. I expect they will. Never attended an event like that. I know, I don't belong there. His expression hardened not with anger but conviction. Who decided that? Grace couldn't answer. He continued quietly. People attending that wedding spend their lives pretending. Grown tired of pretending, she swallowed. There are women in your circle who would gladly go with you. I have no interest in appearances anymore. Why me? Damien slowly walked toward the window. When I return home after impossible days, you're the only person in this house who treats me like a human being instead of a billionaire. Grace looked down immediately. Never meant to overstep. Didn't. He smiled faintly. You simply asked whether I'd eaten. She remembered, months earlier after he had worked through the night, she had quietly left soup outside his office because he looked exhausted. She hadn't expected him to notice. I thought you were hungry. Another pause settled between them. Watched how you treat every member of this household. Grace shifted uncomfortably. Never tried to impress anyone. No, sir. You've never asked me for favors. No, you've never pretended to be someone you're not, she answered almost in a whisper. I don't know how to. Damien nodded. Exactly. She still couldn't believe what she was hearing. What if I embarrass you? You won't. What if they laugh at me? They probably will. Grace looked up. His answer shocked her. You really think so? Yes. You're still asking me. I am. Voice became quieter than ever. Because I'm interested in seeing whether dignity still exists in a room filled with wealth. Grace's eyes filled slightly. No one had ever spoken to her that way. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to run back to the safety of the laundry room where life made sense. Instead, she whispered, I'm frightened. Damien gave a small nod. So was I. The first time I entered a room where everyone believed money made them superior. Grace managed a tiny smile. You were. I simply learned how to hide it. A gentle knock interrupted them. Mrs. Brooks entered carrying tea. She immediately sensed the unusual atmosphere. Am I interrupting? No, Damien replied. Grace has just agreed to accompany me to the Ashcroft wedding. Mrs. Brooks nearly dropped the tray. Grace quickly spoke. I haven't agreed. Damien looked at her. Yet, Brooks looked from one face to the other before softly placing the cups on the table. Then she walked toward Grace. Taking both of Grace's trembling hands, she smiled warmly. My dear, what if everyone laughs? Mrs. Brooks squeezed her hands, then let them. Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes. I don't belong in their world. Brooks smiled with quiet confidence. Perhaps, she paused, but maybe it's their world that doesn't deserve someone like you. Grace couldn't speak. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark evening sky. Somewhere across the city, preparations for the most talked-about wedding of the year continued. None of the guests had any idea that the woman polishing silver in a billionaire's mansion was about to become the one person no one in that ballroom would ever forget. If you're already wondering how Grace will face a room full of powerful people, you're in for an unforgettable journey. For more interesting stories like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell, because the biggest surprises are still ahead. Damien Sterling stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office the following morning, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across Ashbourne City. Behind him, the mansion buzzed with an unusual sense of anticipation. Word had quietly spread among the staff, and every employee seemed to have the same question. Why would the billionaire take his housekeeper to the wedding of the woman who had once broken his heart? Grace Bennett barely slept. She had spent the entire night wondering if she should decline. Each time she convinced herself to say no, Damien's words echoed through her mind. Who decided you don't belong? She looked at herself in the small mirror inside her room. I don't belong, she whispered, then she shook her head. No, that's fear talking. A gentle knock came at her door. Mrs. Brooks entered with a warm smile. Been awake all night, haven't you? Grace sighed. Is it that obvious? Mrs. Brooks chuckled. Raised 3 children, I know what nervous eyes look like. Grace sat on the edge of the bed. What if everyone sees right through me? Mrs. Brooks pulled up a chair. My dear, they will. Grace's shoulders dropped. See a woman who works honestly. They'll see someone who has survived difficult years. They'll see someone who doesn't pretend. She leaned forward. Question isn't whether they'll see you. It's whether you'll let their opinions define you. Grace lowered her eyes. Spent most of my life trying not to be noticed. Mrs. Brooks smiled gently. Then perhaps today is the day the world finally notices the right person. By noon, a luxury car stopped outside Sterling Manor. A stylish woman stepped out carrying several garment bags. I'm Ava Collins, she announced with a bright smile. I was asked to prepare Miss Bennett. Grace almost laughed. There must be some mistake. Ava looked directly at her. No mistake. You're exactly who I'm here for. The next several hours, Grace found herself living inside a world she had only seen in magazines. Her hair was carefully arranged into soft waves. Her makeup remained simple, enhancing rather than hiding her natural beauty. When Ava finally unzipped the last garment bag, Grace stared silently. Inside hung a deep sapphire evening gown, elegant, timeless, beautiful without being extravagant. Grace hesitated. Never worn anything this expensive. Ava smiled. You aren't wearing the dress. The dress is helping people notice you. Grace looked confused. What do you mean? Ava stepped closer. Expensive gowns can't create confidence. They only reveal what's already there. An hour later, Grace slowly stepped out of the dressing room. The room fell silent. Even Ava covered her mouth. Oh, Mrs. Brooks wiped away a tear. My goodness. Grace looked down nervously. Is something wrong? Mrs. Brooks laughed softly. My dear, you look exactly like yourself. Grace blinked. I do, only now everyone else will finally notice. Grace smiled for the first time all day. Downstairs, Damien waited near the entrance. He had already changed into a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His watch caught the afternoon sunlight. Everything about him reflected quiet confidence. When Grace reached the final staircase, his eyes lifted for several seconds. He said nothing. Grace immediately became self-conscious. I knew it. I shouldn't have worn this. Look ridiculous. Damien interrupted calmly. No, she looked at him. You look like someone who has spent too many years believing she wasn't enough. Her eyes widened. And today, he offered a faint smile. Rest of the world is about to discover they were wrong. Grace felt tears threatening again. Don't make me cry before we even leave. A rare laugh escaped Damien. I'll try. Mrs. Brooks walked over carrying a small velvet box. I almost forgot. Grace opened it. Inside rested a delicate silver pendant. It's beautiful. Brooks nodded. It belonged to my mother. Grace immediately tried to hand it back. I can't accept this. You can. It's too valuable. Mrs. Brooks shook her head. It isn't valuable because it's silver. It's valuable because every woman in my family wore it during moments when they doubted themselves. She gently fastened it around Grace's neck. And today, I want you to wear it. Grace hugged the older woman tightly. Thank you. Brooks whispered into her ear. Walk with your head high. Title makes anyone better than you. The drive to the Ashcroft estate felt much longer than it actually was. Luxury cars filled the highway. Television crews waited outside the enormous gates. Grace stared through the window. Never seen anything like this. Damien noticed her trembling hands. Nervous, she laughed weakly, terrified. You can still ask me to turn around. She looked at him. Would you? No, that made her laugh. I thought so. He became serious. Grace. Yes, today they're going to judge you. I know. They'll judge the way you walk, she nodded. The way you speak. I know. The way you smile. I know. They'll even judge your silence. Grace took a deep breath. So what should I do? He answered without hesitation. Them get tired, she frowned. Eventually grow exhausted judging someone who refuses to become ashamed. Grace looked out the window again. I hope you're right. I am. The massive iron gate slowly opened. Grace's breath caught. The estate looked more like a royal palace than a private residence. Perfect gardens stretched endlessly. Crystal fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Reporters crowded behind velvet barriers. As Damien's car stopped, camera flashes exploded from every direction. Grace froze. I can't. Damien turned toward her. You can. Never had cameras pointed at me. He stepped out first, then he walked around the vehicle himself. Instead of allowing a driver to open her door, Damien reached for the handle. He extended his hand. Grace stared at it. You don't have to. I know. She slowly placed her hand in his, the moment she stepped onto the red carpet. The whispers began. Who's she? Is that Damien Sterling's girlfriend? No, I heard she works for him. That's impossible. Grace kept walking. Her heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Every camera turned toward her. Every pair of eyes followed her. She wanted to disappear instead. She remembered Mrs. Brooks' words. Walk with your head high. So she did. One steady step after another. Inside the grand entrance hall, conversations gradually stopped. Women in designer gowns exchanged puzzled looks. Business leaders quietly whispered among themselves. Even members of the wedding party seemed distracted then. Vanessa Ashcroft appeared. She looked breathtaking in an emerald designer dress. Her smile looked flawless. Her eyes did not. She approached slowly. Damien. It's been a long time. Her gaze shifted toward Grace. And you must be. Grace smiled politely. I'm Grace Bennett. Vanessa looked her up and down. What a lovely surprise. There was kindness in her words, none in her tone. I don't believe we've met before. Suppose you're new to Damien's circle, Grace answered honestly. Work at Sterling Manor. Surrounding guests immediately exchanged glances. Someone whispered just loudly enough to hear. Housekeeper, another voice followed. He actually brought his employee. Vanessa tilted her head. Oh, how unexpected. Grace felt the humiliation rising. Before she could speak, Vanessa smiled again. Imagine this kind of event must feel overwhelming. Grace opened her mouth. But Damien answered first, nearly as overwhelming as discovering how quickly adults forget their manners. The hallway became completely silent. Vanessa's smile stiffened. I didn't mean anything by it. I know exactly what you meant. One wealthy guest stepped forward. Damien, surely no offense was intended. Damien looked directly at him. Then perhaps none should have been given. Grace glanced at Damien. She hadn't expected him to defend her so openly. Vanessa forced another smile. Of course. We're all delighted to have Miss Bennett here. Grace knew it wasn't true, so did everyone else. As they walked toward the ballroom, she quietly whispered, You didn't have to do that. Without looking at her, Damien replied, Yes, I did. Orchestra began to play. The ballroom doors slowly opened. Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests turned toward the entrance, one by one. Their conversations stopped. Grace could actually hear the music echoing through the silence. Every eye was fixed on her. And then, from somewhere near the front of the ballroom, a woman laughed just loudly enough for everyone to hear. So the rumors were true. Another voice answered. This should be entertaining. Grace's smile faded. She realized the hardest part of the evening hadn't begun yet. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't stop here. For more interesting stories like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell, because the most unforgettable confrontation of the night is only moments away. The orchestra continued its elegant melody, but inside the ballroom, the music was drowned out by whispers. Grace Bennett could feel hundreds of eyes following her every step. Some looked curious, others looked amused, a few looked openly offended. She kept reminding herself to breathe. One step at a time, she thought. Don't let them see your fear. Damien walked beside her with the same calm confidence that had made him one of the most respected businessmen in Ashbourne City. His expression never changed, but he noticed every whisper, every raised eyebrow, every mocking smile directed toward Grace. A waiter approached carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. Grace reached for one. Thank you. Young waiter smiled politely. Welcome, ma'am. It was such a small gesture, yet it reminded her that not everyone in the room was judging her. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Ashcroft watched them from a distance. She forced a smile for her guests, but inside, frustration was growing. She had expected Damien to arrive alone. If not alone, then with some famous actress or socialite. Instead, he had walked in with a woman no one in the city's elite had ever heard of. That was exactly why everyone was talking about her. Vanessa quietly turned to her closest friend. I want to know everything about that woman, her friend smirked. It won't take long. Minutes later, several wealthy guests casually surrounded Grace near one of the floral displays. Their smiles looked friendly. Their intentions did not. A tall woman wearing an expensive diamond necklace spoke first. I'm Charlotte. Grace smiled. It's nice to meet you. Charlotte glanced at Grace's dress. That's a lovely gown. Thank you. Which designer made it? Grace hesitated. I'm afraid I don't know. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You don't know? No, never paid much attention to fashion. Another guest chuckled. How refreshing. His tone made it clear he didn't mean it. An older gentleman stepped forward. So, Miss Bennett. What line of business is your family in? Grace answered honestly. My parents weren't business owners. Oh, my father was a mechanic. My mother worked at a small clinic. Group exchanged quick glances. Someone quietly laughed. Charlotte tilted her head. So you've had quite an ordinary life. Grace nodded. Had a grateful life. Answer caught Charlotte off guard. Before she could think of another question, a younger man spoke. And what exactly do you do for Mr. Sterling? Grace looked directly at him. I'm the housekeeper at Sterling Manor. Silence, then came the whispers. I knew it. Admitted it. She's really his employee. Someone covered a laugh with a champagne glass. Charlotte smiled sweetly. My goodness. I don't think we've ever had household staff attend one of our weddings. A few people laughed. Grace felt heat rising to her face. Every instinct told her to apologize, to walk away, to disappear. Instead, she remembered Damien's words. People eventually grow exhausted judging someone who refuses to become ashamed. She lifted her chin. I suppose tonight is a night of firsts. Charlotte folded her arms. What do you mean? Grace smiled gently. It means every tradition begins with someone willing to do something different. The laughter faded. Before anyone could respond, Damien appeared beside her. His eyes swept across the group. I hope my guest isn't being interrogated. Charlotte quickly laughed. Oh, not at all. We're simply getting acquainted. Damien looked at Grace. Are you comfortable? Grace answered truthfully. Learning, he nodded. Good. Then he looked back at the others. Because I would hate for anyone to mistake curiosity for poor manners. Group immediately became uncomfortable. One by one, they excused themselves. Grace released a slow breath. I almost lost my confidence. Damien looked at her. But you didn't. She smiled faintly. I came close. Close doesn't count. The first time that evening, she laughed without forcing it. The sound surprised even her. Across the room, Vanessa noticed. Her jaw tightened. She quietly walked toward the stage where the master of ceremonies was preparing for the reception toast. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed. The conversations gradually faded. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced. Before dinner is served, the bride would like to share a few words. Applause filled the ballroom. Vanessa accepted the microphone with effortless elegance. She thanked family members, she thanked friends, she praised her new husband. Then she looked directly at Damien. Learned something important over the years. Room listened. Life has a funny way of reminding us where we belong. Few guests smiled knowingly. Vanessa continued. Sometimes people find themselves in places they never imagined. She slowly shifted her gaze toward Grace. And while everyone deserves kindness, she paused. It is also important to remember that not every room is meant for everyone. Scattered laughter drifted through the ballroom. Grace felt every eye turning toward her. Vanessa smiled as though she had said nothing offensive. Damien's expression hardened. He began to stand. Grace gently touched his sleeve. Please. He looked at her. She whispered, let me. He hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Grace rose from her chair. The ballroom became completely silent. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Grace looked at Vanessa with calm eyes, then she smiled. Been thinking about something since I arrived tonight. Vanessa folded her arms. Oh, Grace nodded. Yes, when I walked into this ballroom, I believed I was entering a world that wasn't mine. She paused. But then I looked around. Every guest watched her. I realized something. No one is born into a ballroom. Silence deepened. No one is born wearing designer clothes. No one is born knowing which fork belongs beside which plate. Few guests shifted uncomfortably. Grace continued. Every successful person here entered a room for the first time. Every respected family had a beginning. Every fortune started somewhere. She looked around the ballroom. So if tonight is my first time in a room like this, she smiled. Perhaps I have more in common with all of you than you realize. A single person laughed. Several guests quietly lowered their eyes. One elderly woman began clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, applause spread across the ballroom. Vanessa's confident smile slowly disappeared, for the first time all evening. She had nothing to say. Damien remained seated for only a moment before rising to his feet. As the applause filled the ballroom, his eyes never left Grace. There was pride in his expression, not because she had embarrassed anyone, but because she had remained true to herself. One by one, more guests stood and applauded. Not everyone. A few still sat stiffly in their chairs, unwilling to admit that the woman they had dismissed had earned the respect of the room. Grace slowly sat down again, her heart pounding. She leaned toward Damien and whispered, I was shaking the entire time. He smiled faintly. I know. I thought my voice would fail me. Didn't. She looked down at her hands. Never spoken in front of so many people. Yet you said exactly what needed to be said. Before she could reply, dinner was announced. The orchestra resumed playing, and the guests slowly made their way toward the reception hall. The mood had changed. The whispers were no longer filled with mockery. Now they carried curiosity. Who is she? She handled that beautifully. I judged her too quickly. Never seen Damien look at anyone like that. Grace heard the comments but chose not to respond. She had learned that silence often carried more strength than an argument. As the evening continued, several guests approached her, not to mock her but to introduce themselves properly. An elderly businessman smiled warmly. Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology. Grace looked surprised. You don't owe me anything. Oh, I do. I assumed your worth could be measured by your profession. He extended his hand. I was wrong. Grace accepted the handshake with a gentle smile. Thank you. Nearby, Vanessa watched the scene unfold. Nothing about the evening had gone according to plan. She had wanted Damien to feel alone. Instead, he looked more at peace than she had seen him in years. She quietly slipped out through the terrace doors into the cool night air. A few minutes later, Damien noticed her absence. He turned to Grace. Would you mind if we stepped outside for a moment? Grace nodded. I'd like that. Gardens were quiet, lit by strings of soft golden lights. The sounds of laughter from the ballroom faded behind them. For the first time all evening, they were alone. Grace took a deep breath. I can finally breathe, Damien chuckled softly. You handled yourself better than most people in that room, she smiled. I didn't feel brave. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. She looked at him. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear. They walked slowly along a stone pathway. After several moments of silence, Damien finally spoke. Do you know why I really asked you to come? Grace glanced at him. Wondered that all day. He stopped walking. When Vanessa and I ended our engagement, I began questioning everyone around me. She listened quietly. I couldn't tell who cared about me and who cared about my name. He looked toward the ballroom. People praised me when business was good. They agreed with everything I said. They smiled at every event. Almost every conversation felt like a negotiation. Grace said gently, that must have been lonely. It was, he smiled sadly. Then one night I came home after losing the biggest deal of my career. Grace remembered. You skipped dinner. He nodded. I thought no one had noticed. I left soup outside your office. I know. He looked directly into her eyes. You didn't ask what happened. You didn't ask whether the company had lost money. You didn't ask whether my reputation would survive. Grace smiled softly. Only thought you might be hungry. Exactly. His voice grew quieter. That was the first genuinely kind thing anyone had done for me in months. Grace blinked in surprise. Never imagined it meant so much. Reminded me that kindness still existed. He paused before continuing. I didn't bring you here to make Vanessa jealous. I brought you because I wanted one honest person beside me. Tears filled Grace's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know the truth. Before either of them could continue, footsteps approached. Vanessa stood a few feet away without the audience, without the cameras. She looked completely different. Gone was the confident smile, gone was the sharp edge in her voice. She looked tired. I hope I'm not interrupting. Damien answered calmly. What is it, Vanessa? She looked at Grace first. Owe you an apology. Grace remained silent. I judged you before I knew you. I tried to make you feel small because I was afraid. Grace frowned slightly. Afraid of what? Vanessa let out a slow breath. I told myself I was over Damien. She gave a small, bitter laugh. But when he walked into that ballroom with someone who looked genuinely happy beside him, I realized I still cared what he thought. She wiped away a tear. That wasn't fair to either of you, Grace answered quietly. Thank you for saying that. Vanessa then looked at Damien. I suppose this is where I ask whether we can start over, at least as friends. Damien was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. I don't hate you. Relief appeared on Vanessa's face. But some chapters aren't meant to be reopened. She slowly nodded. I understand. Truly hope your marriage brings you the happiness you were looking for. Vanessa smiled sadly. And I hope you find yours. She looked once more at Grace. Think you already have the person who reminds you who you are. With that, she turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Neither Damien nor Grace spoke for several seconds. Finally, Grace broke the silence. She seems different. Perhaps tonight changed all of us. Damien looked toward the ballroom entrance and then offered Grace his arm. This evening began because I asked my housekeeper to accompany me. He smiled warmly. Rather it end with my friend walking beside me. Grace looked at him. Just your friend? He laughed, a genuine laugh she had never heard before. I was hoping you'd ask that. She felt her cheeks warm. Suppose we'll have to see what tomorrow brings. Day at a time. One day at a time. She slipped her hand through his arm. Together they walked back into the ballroom. This time, no one whispered. No one laughed. Many guests smiled. Several nodded respectfully as they passed. The woman who had entered feeling invisible was leaving with her head held high, not because she had worn a beautiful gown or stood beside a billionaire, but because she had refused to let anyone else define her worth. As the music swelled and the evening drew to a close, the narrator's voice gently concluded. True class isn't inherited. It isn't purchased. It isn't stitched into expensive suits or hidden behind famous family names. True class is revealed in how we treat those who can offer us nothing except honesty, kindness, and respect. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest dignity, and sometimes all it takes is one unforgettable evening to remind everyone that character will always outshine status. Thank you for watching. For more interesting stories like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell. Share this story with someone who believes kindness is stronger than pride, and we'll see you in the next unforgettable story.